Order, and good morning, and welcome to the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee. This morning we've got a pre-appointment hearing with Dr. Paul Golby, the future chair of the National Energy System Operator. Welcome, Dr. Golby, and it's good to see you here this morning. Are you looking forward to your new role?
Thank you very much, and yes, thank you for seeing me, and very much I'm looking forward to the new role.
What personal qualities would you say you bring to the chair? What's your background and experience?
I'm an engineer by background.
Always a good sign.
Thank you. I'm a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. I started off life in the oil industry, but moved into the electricity sector about 25 years ago. So I've been involved in generation, distribution and supply of energy. And I also, in my sort of post-executive career, have chaired complex companies across aviation, construction and energy. So I think I bring that sort of engineering background, that looking for database solutions and having to take people with me in chairing those quite complex boards.
My next question is, in many ways, I'm sure throughout your working life, you've been learning and adapting as you go forward. And as I often said myself, when I was chair of particularly the Trade Committee during Brexit, I know more this month than I knew last month, and I'll know more next month.
Indeed.
So the question I'm sort of trying to drive towards is, not quite hitting what you think are weaknesses, but what do you think you'll be learning? What do you think you'll need to know? What are your areas that will be developing in this new role?
Sure. Yeah, I think that there'll be a lot to learn, obviously. I think technology is changing very quickly. The technologies that we can bring to bear today were not in existence 5 or 6 years ago, and there'll be new technologies to think about there. And of course, this is a national issue. We need to take a very wide lens, I think, to look at these issues, and we need to take our people with us. So I think, although I've got experience, for example, with airspace change, of dealing with local communities and getting their input, their views to change, I think this is quite a significant challenge as we go forward and try to plan the energy system of the future.
So now, and a point you made there about, or a mention you made of national, in energy areas, we're kind of, the terminology is quite exact. I mean, people just don't have poles, they've got pylons, they don't just have cables or wires. There's sort of a transmission network, a distribution network, and there's other sort of particular pigeonholes. The name, I don't know if you've given it any thought, but the name of this new organisation, the National Energy System Operator, is quite vague, because which nation are they meaning?
I didn't name it, of course. So
I know you didn't, but
I can't claim ownership or disownership. I think it's a national problem. I think it includes
which nation?
It includes all nations. I think it includes the devolved nations very much, because
it doesn't include Northern Ireland.
I beg your pardon. It doesn't include Northern Ireland because the system currently is not as firmly connected to Northern Ireland as it is, of course, to Wales and to Scotland. I think the energy component of it is that there are sort of many energy vectors here. Electricity is a key one, but we also need to think about gas, we need to think about hydrogen, and in future we need to think about carbon capture and storage. So it's if you like, it's a much wider brief than just electricity.
I mean, just given engineering is not loose with its language and what have you, wouldn't the nation's energy system operator have been more exact than national? Because it's one of many. There's many nations that are covered with this energy systems operator.
Indeed, I'm more focused, I think, on what we need to do as opposed to the title. The title is there, and as I say, I wasn't the architect or the designer of the title.
Fair enough. You're suitably absolved from that heinous sin. Philip Dunn.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and I should like to say we're welcoming Philip Dunn as chair of another committee with us this morning, the Environment Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And our committee is undertaking an inquiry at the moment into decarbonising the grid, which is why I've been invited to join this session. So thank you for including me. We've our committee visited, the Environmental Audit Committee visited the Grid Operations Centre earlier this year, and where it was very clear to us that the primary role of the electricity systems operator is to balance the grid. The role of the new organisation, which you're going to be chairing, is much wider. It covers planning capacity and has a responsibility for delivery of capacity.
Indeed.
While advising the government and Ofgem. Do you think that at this point, before you started, do you have a sense as to whether or not NESO is going to be able to have the resources and the ability to undertake such a significant role?
That's a very good question. I think the first observation I will make is that taking the ESO out of National Grid and putting it into government ownership is not a simple lift and shift operation, that we need to build substantial capacity and capabilities, capacity in terms of moving into the planning of the grid rather than just operating it, and capabilities in terms of building gas expertise and building other expertise as we move into that much wider planning role.
It's also changing very significantly because the government has announced in the autumn, following the energy bill, this endeavour to accelerate bringing capacity onto the grid, new renewables and so on. And Ofgem have now changed the rules to allow, will be to allow you to require companies to either use or lose their grid slots. What enforcement powers will you have to be able to make that happen?
Well, the rules are currently being developed. Connections are clearly a problem. They're taking too long, and currently we have, I think it's about 5 times more connections in the queue than we actually need for net zero. I think a key component of this role is to work out, when we're tasked, and we haven't been tasked by the government yet, but working out the spatial plan. If I can stand back and just put this into some terminology, the current grid was designed around a small number of large power stations, traditionally in the Midlands, mainly coal-based. And of course what we have now, they have gone. We've got a lot of wind capacity around the coast. We have batteries coming in. This is a far more complex system. And if I use an analogy, it's kind of expecting our motorway systems to work if we close Edinburgh and move it to Cornwall. You know, that's the scale of the task here. And let me give you another example. I was just reading the other day that the Blackstone are potentially buying the Volt factory, the battery factory that didn't take off. My understanding, that will be about a 1.1 gigawatt load. That's kind of like putting the west of London into that area. So you start to see the need to completely look at the grid and how it's designed, and then to actually help orchestrate what technologies are placed on the grid and where. And I'm not suggesting that this organisation becomes the fact controller or anything like it. Probably a thin conductor would be the analogy, that we need a plan, we need a strategy that will then allow people to connect the right technologies in the right place. So that's what we're aiming to do, and we do need to build capability and capacity in the organisation to allow us to do that.
And that's really where I was going. From the outside, before you took this assignment on, you presumably had an opportunity to interrogate some of the senior management in the organisation. What confidence do you have that you've got the resources within the organisation to be able to undertake this task?
Well, at the moment, we have many of the core competencies, as you would expect, particularly in electricity. We do not have the full complement of capabilities in gas and in some of these planning areas. So it will not be far short, I would suggest, that we will probably need to double the size of the operation, adding maybe 1,000, 1,500 people to the organisation to actually deliver, assuming the government do ask us to produce this spatial plan.
That takes me on to my last question. It's about governance, really, and the relationship that you will have with Ofgem and with the department. Is it part of your brief to review the governance arrangements from the NESO side of the equation, or is that something that you think it's down to Ofgem and the department to oversee?
I almost see this as a triumvirate, if I can use that word. I think there has to be a tensioned relationship between this new organisation, the department and Ofgem, and we've got to find a way of, albeit tension, but working together to deliver for this organisation and for the country. I think that's going to be a key part of the role, potentially, if I become chair, of managing that relationship.
Have you had experience from your previous roles in tackling your regulator?
Yes, I currently chair NATS, the National Air Traffic Service, so I have a similar relationship there, of course, with the Department for Transport and the CAA, who is my regulator in that role, so I have the experience from there. And I also chaired one of the major research councils for the government, so a similar role there in keeping that tensioned, arm's length relationship with the government.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Philip Dunn from the chair of the Environmental Audit Committee, and you can see they're a lot tougher than we are here, but maybe not. Let's see. Vicky Ford.
So I'm the only woman on this committee. I've met some great women engineers. We don't have enough, and they do not have enough role models at the top. Are no women up to this job?
Yeah, I agree with you. I can't change my gender sitting here in
Scotland, maybe.
You will have a really serious leading role
Yeah.
as the head of our energy system.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing to encourage more diversity?
Well, I have a background in encouraging diversity in the companies that I have chaired. If I take Costain, a major construction company that I chaired, we had 40%.
So that's your background.
That's my background.
What
So I will bring the same approach in this role, that you only get diversity, and it's not just gender, it's not just ethnicity, it's about diversity of thought. People approaching a problem from a very different angle, and that's the way that I've built boards in the past, and that's what I would intend to bring to this new organisation. And with the staff too, absolutely. If I'll use a point from my background, but at Costain, we frequently came in the women's top employer. This is a construction company, bearing in mind, and 50% of our graduates were females. So you can do it.
In your background, you currently chair NATS.
Yes.
NATS failed spectacularly last summer when its system crashed. 2,000 flights cancelled, hundreds of thousands of people stranded. Why did no one lose their job?
Well, let me put that into perspective. NATS exists to manage safety of the flying public. So we always put safety first, and if that means reducing flights, that is what we will do. I think that's what people would expect us to do. I do understand the frustration, and will apologise again, as my chief executive has apologised. We have a very good history of systems working. This is the first failure of any note in 10 years, and it was a very specific event that caused the failure. The system involved has been in operation for 5 years. It's handled 50 million flights successfully, and it failed on this occasion.
I hear you that system failure can be okay,
yes,
if provided the safety there. But
yes,
if our national energy system, of which you will be operating, fails in the depths of winter, people will die. So system failure is not okay in your new job.
Right.
How do you make sure that doesn't happen? And in this, people want clean energy, they want secure energy, they want affordable energy.
Yes.
What's most important? Is it reliability, is it affordability, or is it meeting net zero?
They are all important, but I echo your point. We cannot tolerate supply failure. That we have to keep the lights on. Probably more importantly, in some cases, we have to keep the internet working. So security of supply, keeping the lights on, is absolutely the first priority of this organisation. We clearly need to drive to net zero, and we need to do that at an affordable cost, but security of supply, keeping lights on, is the prime function.
How are you going to monitor those different priorities? Reliability, affordability, environmental impact.
We will of course monitor them all. Reliability, we monitor frankly minute by minute. As you know, you can't readily store electricity for any lengths of time, so we have to balance the system, and there are complex systems to enable us to monitor that. They still need to be upgraded. I'm not going to duck that. So we'll be monitoring that. We will be obviously, talked about the spatial plan, we'll be moving towards a situation where we can connect more net zero energy. And of course, we have to do that in a way that's most affordable. So we'll be looking at options and putting options to government that allow us to do that at the most affordable cost.
Hasn't mentioned cleanliness and environmental impact, but we will move on.
We'll move on. Thank you. Well,
thank you, Dr. Golby. I just wanted to follow that up really and understand the powers that the new organisation, the National Energy Systems Operator, has to do what you just spoke about. Mm-hmm. So Vicky Ford has drawn attention to the dilemma between keeping the lights on and moving to net zero. How does your organisation, how does it make things happen? Because we're not a top-down government-led organisation anymore. We're relying on private players to come in to make those investments. How are you going to make it happen?
Okay, well, we do not and will not have the powers to make it happen. Sure. We're not the fat controller. We are the thin conductor, as I've described it.
I understand that, but what are you going to do to get these players in the market to do what everybody here thinks they should be doing?
What we need to do is, when tasked, we need to produce this spatial plan to identify where connections ought to be made and broadly what types of technologies need to be there, and then advise government on what policies are required to encourage that private investment. This will be, in the main, private investors building.
So you haven't got any power, you're just an influencing body then?
Well, we're an influencing body that advises the government on the policies it requires to encourage that investment.
We're just bringing forward various reports that may or may not get implemented by government.
No, we're bringing forward advice, and then we're setting out very clear, data-driven, robust views on how the infrastructure should be routed, what the engineering should be, and hopefully taking advice on the environmental impacts of that
You've
infrastructure.
run some big businesses, and you know that businesses only do things if it's in their financial interest to do that. So what influence will you have on the financial regime to trigger the approach that you've just spoken about in a technical way?
We will be advising the government on what policies are required to give those financial incentives for investors to make those investments. You're quite right, investment is a voluntary act, and therefore the government will have to devise policies that bring those investments forward.
How will we measure your success?
How will we measure the success? I think, firstly, to go back to the previous question, keeping the lights on. Absolutely, this is a major change of this organisation.
We can keep the lights on by not decommissioning coal and not decommissioning nuclear.
Well, you arguably could, except, as I've just said, investment is a voluntary act. We've got many power stations coming to the end of their lives, so they will need to be replaced whatever. So it isn't. We can't do nothing. Doing nothing actually is an action in itself. So I think keeping the lights on, bringing this organisation up to full strength and in a way that it can start delivering on the priorities that the government has set, and then delivering on this spatial plan so that we've got a clear blueprint for the future so that we can all see as a country how we're approaching this.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. A model of questioning efficiency, as ever. Thank you. Derek Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Paul. Decarbonising the energy sector is key to delivering government net zero ambition.
Yeah.
Natural gas, do you see it as being phased out as quickly as possible from there?
I see natural gas as a transition fuel. It clearly produces carbon, and therefore in a net zero carbon world doesn't have a long-term place. But I think, as the Secretary of State said a few weeks ago, we will go through a transition and we'll need some gas-fired power stations to see us through that transition. And of course, transforming heat in people's homes is not as straightforward as changing a power station, for example. So yes, gas will need to be phased out, but I don't think there's a quick fix.
So particularly in domestic properties, can you have any idea yet? I mean, obviously it's early, when that might be a reality for.
It's too early. I can't. I don't have a view on that at this point in time.
Given that may well and is likely to happen, what role will an NESO have in getting that message across to consumers and preparing them for their move to net zero?
I think the organisation will have a role, not a public role necessarily in its own right, but providing very open and robust and clear advice to government, and of course engaging with local communities where we are suggesting that infrastructure needs to be built. We do live on a, relatively speaking, crowded island, and we do need to take people with us when we put some of this new infrastructure in place.
How important is it that we deliver a cross-party consensus on this, and do you see your role as trying to foster that, nurture that?
I think it is important that there's a cross-party consensus on this. I think from where I'm sitting, there appears to generally be one. There may be a difference in timing, but I think the consensus does exist. And I think the organisation will be an independent organisation, independent of government, and therefore I think has to be free to speak to all political parties to make sure that we can do this together, because we've got to work together as a nation to achieve this, because that is the only way, in my view, to actually do it.
And then finally, very briefly, when you are considering the energy mix, and particularly homes not on natural gas but in off-grid areas, will you be part of the discussion and the engagement with government about what alternatives there might be? The committee went and looked at a couple of alternatives back in West Cornwall on the weekend. So far, the government haven't really embraced them, such as the HVO. Do you see your role as actually looking at the energy mix and providing some guidance on what would work?
I think we will do that if we're asked. I'm not aware that we've been asked by government to do that. I mean, my view is we need a diverse energy mix. Yeah. As we've seen, for example, in Germany, putting all of their eggs in one Russian basket was not a clever idea, with being over-reliant on Russian gas. So diversity in all forms, I think, is important.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just, I think it was supplementary.
So, Dr. Golby, our consumers have paid through their bills to create the infrastructure to supply gas to 80% of the homes in the UK. You've just said that natural gas isn't a sustainable long-term solution because it produces carbon. Shouldn't we be putting hydrogen in there instead?
Yes, we certainly should be putting a blend of hydrogen. I'm not sure of the engineering at this point in time as to what level of hydrogen we can put through the existing system. Hydrogen molecules, so I don't want to be too engineering, but hydrogen molecules are tiny compared to gas molecules, and therefore leakage through the existing system is quite difficult to manage. But it's certainly something we should look at. And very clearly, I think there are parts of industry that could convert to hydrogen. One looks at the Humber area, for example, where we could build out from those industrial clusters, maybe with carbon capture and storage, and extend that hydrogen into the local communities in those areas.
You see a substantial role for hydrogen in decarbonisation of home heating?
I certainly do, and it goes back to my previous comment that diversity of fuel source is really an important key to the future.
Thank you. You mentioned a couple of times the fat controller and the thin controller.
Yeah.
And I think it's...
thin conductor, I almost
thin
think...
conductor,
I think
you did correct.
This is almost conducting an orchestra,
yes.
if you like.
Yes, and I did start off about mentioning how you get the terminology correct, and I've misquoted you. You have said the fat controller and the thin conductor, but I think that is a humorous line, but it's pushing at a change in philosophy almost in the UK, because the UK has been a place where the market will take care of everything, and where the likes of if you look at the North Sea sectors, sort of leaving the market, whereas Norway planned things, standardised things. Is the UK having to move to sort of having a system brain, somebody thinking about this rather than just it'll be fine, we'll leave it all to the market?
I think that is behind the creation of this organisation, that we do need a brain, and that's why I deliberately use the term thin conductor, that I don't think this country
is ready for a fat controller.
I don't happen to think that sort of Russian tractor factories really deliver the goods. So
Norwegian energy firms.
Norwegian energy, yeah, you have a very valid point there. I think we cannot just rely on the market to deliver the transformation we're looking for. We need to conduct, if you like, that orchestra of investment. And
it's difficult bringing about change, because there is a change of philosophy required to kind of get within the transition. Perhaps once a transition has occurred, you can allow a certain philosophy to exist within the ecosystem of the new transition. Yeah. But to make the transition, you need the system brain.
Well, I think to make this is a major change in the energy system of this country, bigger than anything we've seen over the past few decades. And I think we have to have a strategic plan, and you can only do that if there's some element of control.
To constraint payments, do you see them as a sign of failure in the development and balancing of the grid? Because if I can build something somewhere and make a lot of money, not generating or else needing to bring on emergency generation somewhere else, it ain't the best, is it?
I think it's a consequence of not having the grid that we need for the future. That ideally, and that's, I think, the whole focus of the spatial plan when we get there, is not to build generation that is either greater or lesser than the grid can manage. And ideally, constraints should be eliminated. It will not be always possible to do that. Yeah. But
there's a lot of chicken and egg in there, isn't there, really?
There is. But I think I keep going back to the spatial plan. That's why we need a plan that actually puts the right infrastructure in the right place with the right type of generation attached at that point.
Who should carry the cost of constraints? Should that be borne by the customers, the retailers, or the transmission operators, do you think?
Ultimately, at the end of the day, everything's borne by the customer. That is a fact of life, and whether it's through taxation or their energy bill, the customer, your electors, my consumers, if you like, ultimately have to pay for this.
Do you see any role or things being improved if we move to, as has been mooted, a zonal market structure rather than one price fits all?
There are arguments that say that could improve the situation. But if I refer back to one of my opening points, we have to take our people with us, and zonal pricing, I think, can appear to be a sort of postcode lottery if we're not careful. So, I think we have to deal with what's practically going to be acceptable as opposed to what might, in an ideal world, be a perfect solution.
Shouldn't zonal pricing bring prices from Surrey to Sutherland, I like alliteration, for customers everywhere, really, your customers, our voters, prices down, and the losses are then the changes in the constraint payments, which are going to large energy firms. So the customer and the voter wins, but the large energy firm loses. What's there not to like?
Well, I think that there is a lot to be said about zonal pricing, but we have to look at it in the round, and we have to look at it in a way that's acceptable to the consumer.
Okay, so the door is open for zonal pricing, really.
I think one of the things this new organisation has to do is to look at a whole variety of options and then put robust data and arguments around them, and then present those options to government in terms of what can be done.
When the options go to government, should the decision be made? I mean, this is a difficult one, I understand, so I'm looking for a general philosophical answer from you, not a specific, and I realise things will change in time, but I mean, do you feel the decision should be a political decision or an economic decision?
I don't think it's possible to
divorce the two.
To divorce the two. At the end of the day, you know, we fortunately live in a democracy, and these difficult decisions, I'm afraid, come back to politicians to make the final decision.
Yeah, I think we could have many complaints about the type of democracy from first past the post at the House of Lords, but I will certainly leave that one there. I'm just talking about connections and solar. There's a lot of concern about large solar being built where the grid can accommodate it rather than where it can or maybe should go. Is that sort of a NESO job to oversee things like that, where things are located, how things happen?
I think that comes back to the point I was making about the spatial plan. It's to really work out what type of generation should be connected and where it should be connected. So it's too early for me to have obviously a definitive view on that.
You know, if it's in the area that we'll know about next month or next year or something like that, which is very understandable in the job. Okay. On constraint payments, they're projected to rise in years to come. Should NESO have targets on constraint payments of reductions or holding them static or any particular policy or any way we could measure success in that, or should the energy firms expect the lottery win annually?
Well, I think going back to basics, constraint payments come about because of the mismatch between the grid infrastructure and where the generation is operating. So, you know, a prime function of NESO is clearly to eliminate that mismatch. Setting targets, I think it's just too early for me to have a view on that. And of course there also is the possibility, because those constraint payments are not only an economic cost, but it's an energy waste, because we're not using energy that's being produced. So
zonal might help by reducing the price there.
Yes, of course, but we could also potentially look at some of that energy producing hydrogen as another energy vector. So that's another sort of route that we need to look at.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, I think I shall move on again. It's back to Derek Thomas, who's been a model of efficiency this morning, like Mark Posey. Mr. Thomas.
Great, thank you for that. And that's is question 8.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Skills. I'm from the slightly different background to you. I'm a construction rather than engineering, but the skills bit is something that really I'm getting quite obsessed about. We're constantly told that there is a skills shortage in the sector that you're, or rather the sector you're in, but going to be taken on at NESO.
Yeah.
What do you think your role or the role of the NESO will be to try and address that?
I think it's not in the remit of NESO. I don't think NESO will have the levers to address it. I think all one can do from that perception is through individual role modelling. I mean, I come from a working class background. I was the first in my family to go to university. And one of the roles I've had previously was to chair Engineering UK, which is to encourage young people to go into engineering. I'm currently on the board of a charity that does something very similarly. We need a massive push in this country to persuade young people that engineering and science-based subjects is an attractive career. I personally, this is a personal statement, I personally regret the demise of the employment service that used to work in schools to do this. I think we've all got a role in industry to try and encourage people into these skill-based subjects.
But if I pick up, and thank you for that, and obviously that's fantastic. If I would take up your thin conductor analogy, so you're conducting this massive masterpiece of energy music in the country. It's going to be annoying for you if you've got loads of tambourines and no triangles, isn't it?
I begin to wish I hadn't used that example. Yes, of course. And look, it is a major problem because not only the UK is not unique in this journey, and a lot of the equipment we're going to need to fulfil the task will also come currently from overseas. So there's a world shortage of these skills, and I just go back to my previous point that we need to do all we can. I know the Royal Academy of Engineering and other organisations are working very hard on this to encourage our young people that careers in engineering and technology subjects are really a fantastic opportunity.
We obviously recognise the role, as you said, of these kind of representative groups, also universities and the industry as well, to drive the skill set. When you meet with the Secretary of State, while I appreciate it might not be an area of responsibility, presumably it's an area where you could apply some thinking expertise and maybe gentle pressure.
Now, look, I think it comes with our role to provide advice to government, and if the advice is we can't move at the pace we need because we haven't got the skills, I think that is clearly an area where we can leverage our expertise.
My next question is about the fact that there's a lot more men than women, but you've addressed that already, so I'm not going to touch on that one. Or rather, Vicky might have addressed it.
I think if you set out to attract females, you can do it. You just have to actually set out a plan to do it.
It was quite impressive. You said that Costain, where you were, took 50% of the graduates.
50% of our graduates
50% of the graduates weren't female.
Were female.
But the 50% that Costain took, but the 50% emerging from higher education institutions weren't female, I presume.
Oh, no, it's much lower than that.
So you had positive discrimination there within Costain.
We didn't have positive discrimination, i.e. in setting targets. I don't think that's the right way. Okay. But we positively discriminated by
getting the best.
By setting out what we were doing. We described Costain, I think very correctly, as our objective was to improve people's lives through the work that we did, and that attracted an awful lot of female engineers to the organisation.
And going back to your point about careers fairs and the role of schools, particularly I think also primary schools, actually the battle is allowing both boys and girls to see what is available and possible, and that there should be no kind of gender encouragement in a particular way. I meet young men, boys and girls in schools, and I think they just see the opportunities that are facing them and want to grasp hold of them. I don't think they see the gender issue in the way we do, which is positive for the future.
Well, I think we tend to turn young girls off engineering as opposed to turning them on, if you like. I think young people are agnostic to this.
Yeah.
How many people work for the organisation?
I'm just going to take in Mark, and then I'll come to
just a quick one. Following the point about skill shortages, you said earlier that you felt that the organisation would need to double in size and that you need to recruit a further 1,000 to 1,500 people into the organisation. Two things really. Given the skill shortages, how are you going to find those people? And secondly, have you negotiated an increase in the budget with government in order to employ those people?
Well, I think it is not going to be easy. Let me, because we do. If we're going to do this role, we need to attract some of the brightest and best people So
Not as if we're doing this role. You are doing this role.
Well, not until I am appointed, of course. That's your. You have the authority on that.
You said we.
If I am appointed, this will be a key focus to recruit those people. Some of them we can already identify. Others, it will be more difficult to find them. I think one of my roles as chairing a body that's arm's length from government is to make sure that we set the right environment and the right pay structure to attract those people.
The question of budget, have you discussed this with the people who interviewed you for the job? Are they ready for you to double the cost of the organisation?
Well, I'm not suggesting we're doubling the cost.
You're going to double the number of people.
Well,
who's going to pay?
Well, the budget for the organisation is overviewed by Ofgem. The budget, as I understand it, and clearly I'm not part of the organisation yet, the budget as I understand it has been put to government and Ofgem, so my assumption at this point in time is that the budget is there to recruit the necessary number of people.
The budget accounts for this additional
yes, it does.
Doubling
yes.
Okay, well, we've got the Minister later. We'll have a chat with him about that.
Okay.
Have you looked at the budget?
Pardon?
Have you looked at the budget?
Yes, I have, yes.
So I want to go back to Derek's point about skills. Okay? You're going to be employing 3,000 people maybe in this sector. You are the conductor at the centre of the entire energy industry in the United Kingdom. We've talked about skill shortages, and you've said nothing about your leadership. You said nothing about, I want to take on apprenticeships, I want to train my own, I want to encourage the sector that I am conducting to lead this, and I want to lead this. You've just said, I'm going to have a difficult time recruiting the people I need.
No, I would beg to disagree. I said that in my chairmanship of Costain, we very clearly set out to recruit some very good people and very diverse people. I will use that same approach in this new organisation.
What's your vision for training, recruiting, not just as the conductor of the entire industry, for what you do within your own organisation and others? Where's the vision?
I think the vision is that we do, to answer, already answered your colleagues' questions, we need to encourage more young people to come into the engineering sector.
You're the conductor.
Well, we do that through some of the mechanisms we already have. I personally go into schools and talk to young school children. I know that there are ambassadors in the ESO currently that do that. We work through the engineering organisations and try to explain the real benefits of young people coming into this skill base.
How many apprentices are currently in the organisation?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to come back to you.
You want to double them, triple them, quadruple them?
I don't know. And look, this organisation doesn't exist at the moment.
Like apprentices?
Sorry?
Like apprentices?
I absolutely like apprentices. My grandson is about to become an apprentice, so I absolutely support apprentices.
Would you like to have an apprenticeship programme in the organisation?
Absolutely, yes.
I think we need a bit more vision. Okay?
Okay.
To challenge this.
Okay.
Because you are going to be the visionary person, okay? And that's what we look for in a chair. Okay. I want to go on about data.
If you might want to respond, sorry, there's been a question about vision there. And just in fairness to the witness, do you want to respond to that?
Look, absolutely. Look, the organisation doesn't exist yet. Allow me to move into the organisation if appointed, and perhaps you'll invite me back to a future meeting of this committee to actually take you through that.
And you promise you'll paint us this
I promise I will paint that vision in multicolours.
Now,
Tambourines and triangles.
Really,
Tambourines and violins.
Really,
yes.
I want to talk about demand, because so much of the market depends on trading, predicting future demand. Is the data good enough? Do you have access to the basic data that you need? Do you need more transparency?
The honest answer is I do not know. My presumption is that there is some good data. Is it good enough? Possibly not. And the whole industry, I think, needs to move, if you like, from an analogue world into a digital world. That there is a major piece of transformation, I think, needs doing to provide a much stronger database for the reasons you just said.
What's your view on transparency of data? Because it can be for, this is a commercial market, and data can be a really important commercial secret. But on the other hand,
I think demand data is, if you like, public property. I see no reason why demand data cannot be shared. In the same way, in my current role, that anybody can click on, I haven't got my phone here, can click on their phone and look at any flight anywhere in the world. I mean, that data exists, and that's the sort of digital data that we need in the energy sector.
Wow, okay.
I like that you've been talking about demand, because we often end up talking about supply but not about demand. Do we need to have a much greater focus on energy demand?
Yes. Because it's in, I think, everybody's interest, economic interest, obviously, to use energy more efficiently, to use energy at times of the day when it's cheaper to produce. So it's a win-win if we've got the data to use that to reduce people's bills.
I also like that you've talked about bringing people with you. Sometimes when we talk about telling people they need to manage their demand, it feels a bit like it's a clunky diktat. There are some people who are very energy poor, and to them it sounds like you're telling them to not warm their houses and not keep the lights on. But others of us are just burning through data on our phones and all the time, and exploding our data, our demand. Tell us more about how you bring people with you on this journey about demand.
We can't and shouldn't tell people. We have to find ways of encouraging them. And going back to your previous question, we have to provide the data so that it's as easy as, I sort of just walking in the queue this morning, coming into the house. Virtually everybody in the street was on their mobile phones. We have to make it as simple as that. So that people can make very simple choices with how they use energy, the same way they make choices in how they use data on their mobile phones.
Should there be a better differentiation in how we manage demand for electricity and how we manage demand for heat?
Well, both can be the same, of course. My house is heated with heat pumps. That's electricity. We need to get the right balance. And again, I think it's something that we need to look at and maybe advise government in terms of most of the environmental tariffs at the moment, of course, are placed on electricity as opposed to gas. Quite understandable, because in some areas, remote areas, gas isn't available to people. But we need to have that, if you like, cross-energy vector so that we can look at both together.
Just a quick question about infrastructure connecting us. So my constituency of Chelmsford, mostly city, urban. But a couple of fields outside my constituency boundary, we're going to potentially have this huge set of pylons that are going to run the whole way along the east of England. Most of my constituents aren't contacting me to say they're worried about this. They're just using their electricity. They don't care. The constituents whose houses face onto that, some of them care like Billio, okay? And areas of the east of England where these are going to go running across are some of those communities, massively care about this.
Yeah.
How do we, and if we don't have those, we won't have any electricity.
Yeah.
How do we bring people with us? How do you have the communities that are going to have the new infrastructure feeling that they are being fairly compensated for the demand being used by everyone else?
I think there isn't an easy answer. If I use my aviation experience for a moment, the vast majority of people want to be able to fly on holiday. Very few people want their homes to be overflown with aircraft. Very, very difficult to match those two differences. I think the only way we can do this with local communities is to look at some form of community payments to compensate communities for housing infrastructure from which they don't directly benefit. The French do this actually quite well, albeit they've got a lot more land mass to do these things than we have. But I think community payments has to be something that we look at.
Payments or cheaper electricity?
It could be either or.
Good. Thank you.
My question's been asked, thanks.
Fair enough. Just a question going back to the constraint payments that we were talking about, and I should have been pointing out, I think Derek Thomas probably gave me the in when he mentioned triangles, because there's a bit of a trilemma around that. I mean, we have where the resource is, the wind is blowing or the sun is shining when it comes to renewables. We've got the generational assets that it typically have to be when that's blowing, and then we've got the transmission assets, whether they're interconnectors or transmission cables, and in there lies a difficulty with the constraint payments. And over a period of time, you might be at one point in time and say, it's on, we've got constraint payments now, but in a few years' time you might manage away those constraint payments by changing the balance of the last two of those assets. The initial renewable resource you can't. And I just wanted to hear what sort of thinking the organisation might have around that.
I think it's very, very early for me to tell you what the organisation thinks at this point in time. I think our objective,
or your own preliminary
my personal, we ought to, constraint payments should be minimised wherever we can, and I think that's getting the right generation with the right infrastructure. It's only there because we've got a mismatch at the moment. So if we can get the right spatial plan, and back to my conducting the orchestra point, if we can get that right, those constraint payments will diminish quite dramatically.
Okay, we're coming to the end of this at the moment. You take up your position formally in...
subject to your approval, of course. I understand I will become an advisor to the department in a month's time, something like that. And then the current plan is that the organisation will come into existence sometime over the summer. That's the latest advice that I have from the department.
Okay, well, can we thank you for your time this morning, Dr. Golby, and wish you well in the projected role that you're due to be in. I think we've certainly enjoyed this morning's exchange, and particularly grateful for your offer of coming back to the committee at some point when there becomes more singing and dancing, when there are more triangles and tambourines or whatever, and whenever the thin conducting is in full operation of that all singing, all dancing band. But that's it for this morning. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Order. Thank you and welcome to the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee's second session this morning. This one's on the flexible grid for the future, and we have the Minister with us. And can I say at the outset, we might be from different political colours, Minister, but you're new to the role and you have decided to come after 2 weeks. I'd like to quite openly say, on a non-political, personal point, many a time I've dealt with new ministers who've used the opportunity they're new to dodge it. You've shown great fortitude, honesty, sincerity, fairness, and many other adjectives that I'd like to put forward by coming here this morning. I'm impressed. The committee are impressed, and whether the conduct of this will be no different though during the hearing. But I just want to say at the outset that fair play to you for coming along.
And I say when I received the call to return as a minister, my team had a look when the next oral session was, and they said, "Don't panic, it's the 21st of May." So when I accepted the role and spoke to my private secretary, I said, "It's lucky I've got sort of over a month to prepare." And they said, "No, Minister, it's Tuesday. We're on our way to come and see you now." So 24 hours for oral. So this week and a bit is a luxury.
Right, we've done the nice bits. Let's get into it. Minister, there's general agreement that continued uncertainty on the question of locational pricing is damaging. When will we get that certainty?
You're looking around the sort of changes coming forward with REMA. You know, I've already had quite a lot of engagement with stakeholders, and it is absolutely clear that certainty unlocks investment and will help us meet our ambitious targets. So there's absolutely no disagreement here. But at the same time, I was pleasantly surprised. I did a trade event with BEMA last week, and I did a panel event with in effect the supply chain yesterday, that there is a recognition that there are very big questions that need to be asked, that it is better that we get this right than we rush and get it wrong, and therefore we have approached this...
We rush and get it right.
You've got, well, in an ideal world, you do it as quickly as you can. But what we've been doing is we've been doing it in a stage process. So the first round of consultation, in effect, was a sort of blank piece of paper asking all of the questions. And there were some clear steers. And that's where we've removed some of the options based on the feedback from stakeholders around nodal pricing, offering different pricing for different forms of technology. And we now have a tighter second set of consultation, which will then allow us to finalise. So there are some things that are being set out now in an intermediate way, but I believe it's 2025, 2026 will be when we will then be in a position to give firm certainty across the board.
We've just had the new chair of NESO and the chair designate of NESO talking about the zonal pricing gives the benefits, as he put it, to his customers and our voters of cheaper electricity. The second REMA consultation acknowledges those benefits the pricing could deliver consumers and the costs of running the electricity system. These are recognised by Ofgem and the electricity system operator. What's holding you back from committing to the reform? Because, as you correctly said, indecision costs.
So, first of all, I had the pleasure of meeting with Paul last week, and I'm absolutely thrilled we've got somebody with such a wealth of experience in this area. So, as he goes forward, he can hit the ground running. It's like all things, you just have to be absolutely sure, because there is potential around the flexibility and delivering savings for consumers, and we're very pragmatic. We have ambitious targets to hit, our net zero commitments, we're ahead of schedule, but we have to work with the public and businesses and make sure that we aren't unduly impacting consumers. Now, there is a potential, if all of this works, and the emphasis is on the if, that this could deliver cheaper bills, but we have to be careful of perhaps unintended consequences, and that's why it's right for this second round of consultation to make sure there aren't things that have been missed before we rush ahead, because this is going to unlock billions and billions of pounds worth of investment. You can't undo that. So it's right that we do this in that stage process, because we want to be able to be certain we can deliver cheaper bills for consumers.
Are there vested interests who would rather this not happen, who don't want this change because they're going to lose free money?
Well, again, it's always about the balance of making sure that you've got sufficient capacity within the system, that you aren't pricing out innovation and new technology and locking us into yesterday's answers. But it's also making sure that you can deliver enough certainty that people will unlock the investment that we need. And again, at the event I was at yesterday, there were people responsible for the huge amounts of money that we need to unlock, and they are greatly encouraged by the direction that we are going. And this is not a thing that's unique to the United Kingdom. This is a global issue. I'm flying off to Berlin at the early hours tonight as we discuss this topic in detail across the world, as we all navigate challenges around supply chain and how you incentivise and unlock the investment for the next generation of upgrades, but making sure that you take consumers, public and businesses with you along the way.
The lumping of the public and the businesses together, I'm sure that the public from Surrey to Sutherland within what I would call the current United Kingdom are quite welcoming of the cheaper energy. What you will be hearing probably in megaphone levels coming towards you are those who can see the free constraint money going. That is where the problem is, and that is where the uncertainty will. It's almost like an episode of Yes Minister, very brave, very courageous minister, and that is enough to make any minister go stop. And surely, at the point of the data will come clear to you as minister, and the decision will have to be made.
And that's why we've done this staged process. So where there was clear consensus, for example, around nodal pricing, around not offering different prices, different technologies, we've been able to be decisive on that now. We then have a much tighter second set of consultation, which will then shape going forward. I spent 4 years as a minister in the DWP. Everything on paper was always great at the beginning, but that's why you have to consult, because there are people with real life experiences from different areas. Again, yesterday there were about 80 stakeholders. All of them had a very different angle that they wished to focus on, and rightly so. And that's the whole point of this stage consultation, that we can take on board those, because this is such large sums of investment investment. You can only do it once.
Okay, my final question. There's an election coming up by the end of the year, most likely October, November. Is what some gossip pass around here, but who knows? Will decisions be made by then?
Well, there's various different strands, but I would say, aside from the obvious, that we would hope to still be in position post-election. So if that was the case, it wouldn't change.
We know what you'd hope, but I'm asking you...
There's my on-message part. But the reality is we're looking to build consensus on this area because of this shouldn't be a political issue. We all want to be able to meet and exceed our net zero ambitions ahead of schedule, but taking consumers along with us. And to do that, we have to have efficient systems that remove duplication, that recognise where power can be generated, where it needs to be used, and to make sure there's sufficient capacity.
That's not necessarily before the election, I'm seeing that.
As much as we can do, but none of us know when the election could be called.
If the let's say call it the end of the year, how much will be done the stages at the end of the year? I'm aware of time.
I will defer to my colleagues on where we are in the process.
We've got the second consultation on REMA programme is out at the moment. It closes on the 7th of May. And what we said in that consultation is that we're looking to take the final decisions for the reasons that the Minister set out in mid-2025. And so that's the timetable that we're working to at the moment. But obviously we'll look at all the views that come in through the consultation and review where that leaves us in terms of the level of consensus and the issues that still need further work.
Thank you for that. Mark Posey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. And this inquiry is about how we develop the grid for the future. And it's fair to say, Minister, at the moment we're in a bit of a mess, aren't we? Because we've got 675 gigawatts of projects that are able to be connected to the grid. That's twice the capacity that we need to decarbonise the power system by 2035. But we know from previous experience that a whole load of those are never going to get connected. And we've got this challenge, which the government have brought forward as a connections action plan. Please tell us how we're going to deliver it.
Okay, you're absolutely right. I think the very first thing that was brought to my attention upon entering into the department is the very long queue, the unacceptably long queue. And in theory, if all of that was delivered tomorrow, we would exceed what we need to do, even with our ambitious targets in this area. That said, a lot of those schemes are speculative. So even when they get to the front of the queue, they're not actually ready to proceed. So based on that, we have started to change the rules that will qualify whether you should be in a queue. So we made some changes in March this year, so it's probably too soon to see much of a difference, but we are monitoring that closely, and there will be further changes in January. And in simple terms, you in effect have to be shovel ready to be able to enter into that queue. So that's the immediate part. And then as part of our wider work, and I'm sure we'll get onto this around the spatial strategy, where we'll be looking to sort of provide a clear coordinated steer to where we want to see both power generated and where the network will then develop. It could be that where we have identified the target areas, those applications are then sped up through the process. But already we have seen some significant improvements. Some of the solar schemes have now been delivered 10 years ahead of when they were initially thought they were going to. And we're just looking to, we recognise this is a key area. There is progress being made. There's more things entering the queue all the time. that is a good thing, but it's a challenge that we have to meet head on, and that's why we're going to change those rules around the milestones and improve the capacity.
And Minister, you said that the developer needs to demonstrate that their scheme is shovel ready. Who's going to determine that? Is that the ESO? Is that NESO? Who's actually going to make that decision?
So what the ESO is doing at the moment is inserting into the connection agreements that existing developers in the queue have a series of milestones that are basically project delivery milestones that they'll need to hit. So once those milestones are in place...
What I want to understand is who's got the power and who's got the authority here. And then I want to follow up from that by saying...
As it stands now, it's the ESO.
How robust is that process going to be against judicial review, for sake of argument, if somebody believes that they're taken out of the queue inappropriately?
Because they won't have been in the queue, because as of January, they will only be able to enter
What about
the queue.
those that are already there, Minister? We've got this 675 gigawatt there now.
Understood. So to start with, those that will be entering into the system, we will be only offering a specific connection date when they are ready to progress. And then those within the queue at the moment, we are looking at those milestones.
That's where the problem lies, isn't it? The problem's the existing queue. It's not changing the rules for those who are about to come on after you change the rules. It's those who are already there.
Yes, but you review them earlier, and therefore if they're not ready to proceed, they cannot proceed, so you can then move on to the next applicant.
They can come out of the queue.
They would not progress in the queue because they're not ready to progress. Because at the moment, they effectively, we get there, everybody's lined up to then support the delivery of that, to then discover that cannot proceed. By bringing that forward, it's just left there, and then on new applicants, they wouldn't have even be able to join the queue.
We all agree that's the right thing to do, but the question is, some people are going to be disadvantaged by that, and how open and transparent is that process to ensure that you haven't got people claiming that the system has been prejudiced against them because maybe somebody in the department didn't like one particular project compared to another.
So that feeds then into the wider work, which I know we will come on to, around the strategic planning network, where we, as a coordinated, not just us, but across government, will coordinate where we would like to see future generation, future grid and capacity build, to then prioritise the areas of greatest need.
Thank you very much. Moving on with no further ado, Right Honourable Vicky Ford.
Community benefits and being a material planning consideration. So let's imagine that you've got a village, beautiful countryside, and a lovely walk that goes north and a lovely walk that goes south. But to the north you want to have, there's a potential big solar farm. It's going to completely change to the view that people have loved for generations, and to the south there's another solar farm. One of those developers has said, whilst we put the panels out, we're also going to give everyone in the village a panel on their roof, and the other developer has not offered that to the community. So clearly the community would like to have the one that gives them something clean, green, affordable electricity as well. But it's, as I understand it, not part of the planning consideration, that community benefit. Why will the government not let this community benefit be a material planning consideration so the planners can really say we should go for that one and not the other?
And I think it's a really important point. Now, we're publishing in June more details around this area, and I speak from experience as a constituency MP that has seen benefits from a voluntary community benefit scheme, a village, where there was a proposal for quite a significant solar panel installation adjacent to the village, and they engaged proactively with the parish council. The parish council said our relatively remote village would like to see fast fibre broadband. £70,000 BT upgrade was required, and the road that runs through our village has a disproportionate amount of potholes, and we would quite like some road resurfacing. They sorted both those things out itself through planning and is now contributing to the nation's renewable generation. And I'm quite excited about the potential of community benefits, but at the same time I'm a little nervous of whether we are going to not quite get it right. And I think you've articulated the importance of getting it right. It should be genuinely community-led. It shouldn't be sort of presumed community benefits. It should be those who are impacted having a genuine say and having full flexibility in what that community benefit should be. Now, in some cases, with some of the larger schemes, that may be direct cash payments in one form or another, whether discounts on bills, whether cash payments, or it could be a cumulative community project, whether that's leisure, environmental, or structural infrastructure, whatever. I'm very relaxed, but it has to be tangible, because if community benefits are going to work, the public has to have a tangible benefit. Otherwise, you are just spending money, which is ultimately customers' money, for no reason at all.
We have been told time and time again by local authorities, planning experts, etc., that if community benefits are going to work, they need to be able to look at them in the planning decision. They need to have the ability to look at it as a material consideration. Right. And it currently isn't. Yeah. So can I ask you, because I know that you've got this passion,
so you're
please
right.
Will you take this away and look at
and I do, and I welcome that challenge, because it isn't part at the moment, but I think it should be, because if you are, because community benefits isn't always just the money. That's an important part, but it is around that ability to have the final decision when choosing between different money projects. So I think it's an eminently sensible point. These are the sorts of things that have to remain.
Now.
They have to remain under constant review, because I've seen many incentives put in across governments of all political persuasions that don't always land as they should do. And this ultimately is a bill picked up by customers. It's about speeding up the process. It's about recognising the direct and indirect impact on communities. We've got to get it right. That's a very good suggestion.
Massive issue in the east of England of the new grid connection going through.
Yes.
The transmission owners are telling us that long-term socioeconomic benefits are going to be fantastic. But to the people affected on the ground, they don't necessarily just want this cash payout that the government announced at the last in the autumn, but having the ability to actually negotiate properly, to have it considered in the planning would be really important. So I'm just going to leave it on that question, that the ministers agreed to look at that. Yep. I think that's a major win. Now, onshore wind, and declare an interest, because I was one of the Tory rebels that said we needed to be able to have onshore wind in the levelling up bill if the community wants it. I don't think we were that rebellious, because I think the government listened very closely and delivered. But the Chief Executive of Scottish Power came and told this committee that onshore wind in England is, quote, God-forsaken. Will the government lift the additional planning restrictions on onshore wind developments in the footnotes of the National Planning Policy Framework? I agree, it's a very specific question.
Yeah. Well, I didn't sign any of the letters against onshore wind. So I'm pro. I'm in the same position as you. I see them as maybe I'm a bit geeky in terms of engineering beauty. And it is an important part. Increased onshore wind generation is an important part of our 2030 targets. So I understand the challenge that you are putting forward. There isn't any plans at the moment to make further changes. We did make changes. So where there is community consent, onshore wind can proceed. As with all things, everything is kept under review because we have targets. We have to meet those targets. We are held to account in the UK and internationally on the targets we set forward. So I hear what you're saying, but as it stands, there are no plans to make changes to that.
Okay, so we changed the law in the Levelling Up Bill last year, but there are still significant barriers, we've been told. This Bayes committee, the previous Bayes committee, looked at this as well. And if we are to make what we promised in the Levelling Up Bill, that with community consent these could go ahead, it does need to have other changes. Could you please take that away and look at it, particularly these footnotes in the National Planning Policy Framework, the inclusion of onshore wind within the development consent for nationally significant infrastructure projects?
I mean, one of the key areas, and we will take that away and look at it, is one of the benefits of the changes that were brought forward is around the pre-application work to try and speed up the process to make it more straightforward, and again striking that balance around certainty and then the community benefits.
We've also been told that there's need for much greater clarity on the issue of using agricultural land for solar farms and battery storage. What are your views? Do you realise why we need greater clarity?
Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, there is a presumption in planning that best agricultural land should not be the presumed option. We have re-strengthened that in the planning documents in January. As it stands, even if all of those applications came forward, it would still be less than we use for golf courses across this country. And what we need to look at is on a case-by-case basis, because we don't want a complete ban, because if you may have part of a scheme and there would just be no logic to leaving part of the scheme undone because it would no longer remain in use for agriculture. It allows a balance for farmers with changing economics. But at the end of the day, we also recognise the importance of food security, and that is why we've made it clear in planning that it should not be the presumption that that should be the desirable place to do those schemes.
Witnesses have particularly said that one of the things that's causing inconsistency and confusion is a written ministerial statement on the issue back in 2015.
Yep, that's why we reiterated the rules in January in the planning guidance, because we recognised that that wasn't always being followed as the intention of the policy, so it was reiterated in January. It's too soon to see whether that has been sufficient, but it is under constant review. I know from orals that this was probably the topic that was most raised, so it is under constant review, but we did re-emphasise the intention of the policy in the strengthened January statement.
We are still being told, I think even with the January statement, that there is confusion from what...
Part of it's actually, part of it is a consequence of the lack of grid connection capacity, which again emphasises why the spatial strategy is so important. Because if you are wanting to invest in a major solar scheme, you will only get a return on your investment if you can hook up to the grid, and consequently sometimes that is driven by where there is grid capacity rather than necessarily the overall land use. So that's why we've got to tackle that part, and then we can actually then provide the zones where we want to see the connections and the power generated, and that indirectly will then ease some of the pressure on this best agricultural land.
Do you think there needs to be a public information campaign on the benefits of solar and wind?
We have to work with consumers, public and business, across all of our work as we aim to go to net zero. I made that very clear in some of my responses. Look, I've always been green-minded. If Mark Garnier had been here today, I would have paid tribute to Mr. Morris, who was my geography teacher from his constituency, who instilled this into me at a young age. But you can only go as far as you can have the partnerships with business and the public, and you have to do that partly through not adding unnecessary burdens to their bills, because that is a cost that will impact their views, but also sharing the information of why we're doing what we're doing. So do we need to go as far as public? I think already there's a lot of information in this area, but we have to work with, not against the public and businesses.
And there's a lot of frustration of places where you could put solar panels, not putting solar panels, like new buildings, top of car parks, etc.
Excellent.
But let's move on.
Mr. Morris seems to have been a wise man.
He was.
We generally agreed on that. This talk about the best agricultural land for solar panels, does it apply to golf courses at all? You did mention golf courses, and people seem very concerned about agricultural land when it comes to solar panels, but I don't hear the same shout when it comes to golf courses. Is there a particular sudden interest in agricultural land when it's for solar panels, do you think?
I'm not an expert on the planning decisions behind golf courses, I'm sorry.
Well swerved, Minister. Well swerved. You're 2 weeks in the job.
I note your comment.
Thank you very much. Brilliantly done. Will you accept the National Infrastructures Commission's recommendation to make it a legal requirement to review the national policy statements for energy every 5 years to ensure they're kept up to date?
I believe that's yes.
We have committed to commissioning an external review of the current MPS review process, and I think we do accept that they need to be reviewed, considered and reviewed more frequently than they have been.
Okay. And I'll tell you why that's important, because this is not a static landscape, in the sense that innovation, I mean, we as a government spend £4.2 billion on innovation around low carbon technology. What we are looking to plan today could be very different in 5 years' time, because there could be new things unlocked, whether that be hydrogen, significant advances in existing technology, or brand new technologies we've not even dreamed of yet. And therefore you cannot just shut the door for a long period of time. Everything has to be kept under constant review, because there could be a game changer that unlocks cheaper, more efficient sources of low carbon technology. We need to be first to be able to facilitate that. That's the government's role. We have to facilitate and encourage innovation in this area, because that is the fastest way that we'll meet our ambitious targets. So we are very receptive wherever it is helpful to be more flexible on our reviews to allow us to change quicker.
Shouldn't the reviews be a legal requirement to make sure they happen? Otherwise, you know how it goes.
Yeah, fair challenge. I shall take that away.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy with that. I mean, another point I just want to raise before I move on to Mark Pawsey is just, given the urgent need to speed up network consenting in Scotland, when will the government amend the 89 Act as recommended by the Electricity Networks Commissioner, or even devolve the power to the most relevant government on the issue?
89, a bit before me. Who wants to take this on?
Certainly.
You're a young'un then.
We've agreed that we will work with the Scottish Government to consult on a set of proposals looking at Scottish consenting for energy in Scotland during the course of this year. So at the moment we are discussing with Scottish Government colleagues about that consultation.
Fair play. Okay. At least you're open to working with them and getting things moving.
You know, during my time in DWP, I always worked very closely with my Scottish colleagues. I don't see this being any different in this role.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably a lot of space for devolving the thing, but let's not get into that one this morning on this committee. Mark Pawsey.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, can I just go back to solar? A couple of things. One is that we've seen a whole host of applications come in at 49.9 megawatts, because that gets just underneath the nationally significant infrastructure threshold. Do you think that needs looking at?
So I'm not renewables. That is Minister Bowie. But in terms of adding to the pressure on applications on the grids, maybe there's a case. But that will be Minister Bowie who needs to look at that.
Right. And do you think we're doing enough to use rooftops before we go to agricultural land?
So last year saw 17,000 rooftop installations per year. We are seeing progress, particularly around new builds. Again, it's linked to whether, again, it's the balance around the actual added on costs to housing with pressures for people to get onto the housing ladder. But certainly micro generation that is at the home, there is definitely, that's an important part to play. The economies of scale for us to hit our ambitious targets will rely on the larger installations, but rooftop installations are a part of the mix, absolutely.
And in my part of the country, Midlands, we've got loads of new warehouses being developed.
Yeah, and this is the area.
There's no mandate. There's no national requirement for solar on those buildings. Why not?
Well, sometimes it's. This is a big area where there's potential growth opportunities if we can resolve. Often it's a conflict between.
My constituents would say, we've got all these warehouses. Why haven't they all got solar on them?
Because there is often a conflict between what a landlord wishes to do with the building and what a tenant wishes to do with the building. Because
it's within the gift of government to solve that, Minister.
Well, it was a question that I raised myself as a mere backbencher, having taken my daughter to Jungle Kingdom, and he said to me, "My biggest cost is my energy costs. I have a gigantic roof. I want to put solar panels on there, but the landlord doesn't." And in some cases, that in the most simple terms, you will get a financial return on solar installation if you live in your house or remain in your building for sufficiently long. Sometimes landlords may not be intending to hold on to the building as long as perhaps the tenant presumes they will be. But there is, and again, this is where perhaps technology may solve the problem in the sense that you can't really pick them up and move them with you. Now, we may see in future...
It's the right thing to do, Minister.
But no, I agree. And the government has to have a look at this. But again, it's getting that balance of not providing without not recognising the constraints of if a landlord isn't planning to hold on to that building. But if we can make it easier for this to be the case, your constituents are right. There are huge swathes of warehouse roofs and other public buildings where there is potential with very little opposition to increase the capacity. It is part of our mix. It's a very live issue. So I'm agreeing with you, but we've got to do this carefully.
I want to also ask you about two challenges in reinforcing the grid in the way that we want to. I want to talk to you about supply chain, the raw materials, suggestions that we haven't got enough copper to provide the cables. And the second thing I want to talk to you about is another area I know you'll be familiar with, which is skill shortages.
Yes.
Material constraints.
Okay, I'll do it in reverse order if that's okay. So I'm going to pass on the materials to my better brief colleagues on that side. But for me, the supply chain is probably the most important stakeholder for me. I've made it very clear with my forward planning of my diary that I want the maximum amount of time to talk to people on the front line, supply chain, whether that's one individual in their van, whether it's the micro, small businesses. The very first visit I did as a minister was to the BEMA trade event to talk to those people, because they're at the forefront of knowing the challenges and the opportunities, and often the blindingly obvious solutions that perhaps has escaped us policy people. I'm a former business owner myself, so I get the importance of this. And I want them to help shape that. Now, the big challenge is around the skills. Yeah. We have a fantastic new minister in Minister Luke Hall. He gets this. I welcome the fact the government has invested billions in expanding the T-level programme apprenticeships. However, we are also reliant, the challenge back to the supply chain, whilst I'll be a very supportive friend of theirs, they need to step up and they need to engage with the educational facilities to provide the mentoring and the inspiration for people to choose those occupations. And very quickly, I'll put this in the simplest form. I used to do the annual apprenticeship awards at my local college. There was another gentleman who used to join me, and I said to him in the breakout room, I said, it's very good of you doing this. Why do you do this? I do this because it's my role. Why do you do this? And he said, well, I run a plumbing business. I do it every year, and I come in 4 times a year to provide a bit of mentoring. And I said, this is fantastic. And he said, it isn't fantastic. He said, I have to recruit 2 people a year. There are 100 students here. I go in 4 times a year. I spot the best 2 and I offer them a job before they graduate. And I get the best. Yeah. My competition can fight over the other 98. Now, we have all made our career choices, whether us as politicians or wider people in this room, because somebody will have inspired us to take a particular path. The supply chain, who like most supply chains in most industries are crying out for skilled people, they've got to work with these T-level providers, the apprenticeship providers, to provide that opportunity to get them. The money from the government is flowing, but we need to open the doors both educationally and with those first steps on the career ladder.
And it's not just engineers, it's planners and other people.
Yes.
And I just want to pick up something that came from our previous session with Dr. Golby, when he said he needs 1,000 to 1,500 people. He's in a discussion on skills, wasn't sure whether he was going to get them. Are you happy that NESO will get the staff it needs in the same way as the sector as a whole will get the people it needs?
And there's 2 elements here that we've got to be coordinated to make sure. So first of all, as our non-renewable sectors decline, we've got to make sure we transfer those skilled staff onto the new green jobs. And secondly, in other areas, and you rightly highlight, it's not just the engineers, it's the planning system. And that's why it was either the autumn or the spring budgets where we brought forward the ability to do the full costs of planning applications, to try and increase resources within planning departments, to give them the physical resources in terms of staff to be able to process decisions quicker. So absolutely, we're all on the same
So I don't know whether funding of NESO is your responsibility or not, but 1,000 to 1,500 skilled people is a pretty big resource. Is NESO adequately funded to do the work we're going to expect it to be doing?
So I'll do NESO and materials now tomorrow.
Thank you. So on NESO funding, it will be funded through the price control regulated by Ofgem. So Ofgem, I think, is worked with us throughout the project.
We've got a good sense of what it's going to cost.
Very supportive. So yes, I think we do, and I think we're expecting it to need to roughly double its workforce to be able to take on the additional roles that we're giving.
We wanted some reassurance that the money was there and ready to be spent.
The money will be there through the price control, provided Ofgem are happy that it's legitimate spends by the organisation. Ofgem have been working very closely with us on the setup.
And Ofgem have made it crystal clear they don't want to be the reason for unnecessary delays anywhere in the system. So this will be an important factor to making sure there isn't.
All right.
On the supply chain, you asked about the availability of copper, whether that's a constraint.
Materials more broadly.
Materials in general. So we're not currently being flagged availability of copper specifically as an issue, but what is the case is that supply chain constraints are a significant challenge for transmission, not just for us but globally as well. So a number of actions that we're taking. Ofgem have accelerated a number of significant transmission projects through their accelerated strategic transmission investment decision, which is about £20 billion of projects which have been taken through expedited regulatory processes. That's allowed the transmission companies to go out to the supply chains in bulk and get supply chains lined up for all those
There's
projects.
a clear line of sight.
There's a clear line of sight, exactly, because that visibility and scale is really important. We've also got the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, which includes 390 million for supply chains for offshore wind and networks. So we're currently shaping that grant scheme together with industry as to where are the biggest constraints in the supply chain and where we target it.
And, you know, can I just build slightly on a really important point you've made here? Because part of my role, a lot of it is the international commitments as we set out what we're doing and we share best practice and encourage other countries across the world to meet the various targets that are set. I want to slightly push harder on people being more open about the challenges, because sometimes it's just easy to talk about all the success stories, everybody pats themselves on the back and then goes back. We all need to be open and transparent where there are challenges to meet targets, because the earlier we can identify stress points, weaknesses, the quicker we can start working on the alternatives. So this is something I take very, very seriously.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen.
Excellent, thanks. Just on materials, there's a good book I'm currently delving through, a very readable book by Ed Conway of Sky TV, Material World, which I see the ministers nodding about, and I think we'll both concur it's worth...
I've not read it, but I've seen many of his explainers where he does the very clever sort of videos to explain things, so I will take that suggestion.
Yes, well, okay, very good. We're giving you a lot of work here. Derek Thomas.
Thank you for that. Smart meters.
Yeah.
When I started in Parliament, I joined the Science and Tech Committee, and I was there for 2 years. And we were really concerned then about the smart meter rollout. How's it going?
So, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. We've hit the targets. Were they 71% for the utility providers? Oh, okay, good. More needs to be done. First of all, around and there were changes around the fact every time you change utility provider, you would have to start again. So there needed to be better coordination around that. But it's an important part, both in terms of empowering consumers over their own control of their costs and behavioural, and also in terms of our demand side response that we've been testing over the last 2 winters, where we can then empower consumers to make savings, which also then benefit the wider grid. This has to be kept under review, whether that's they can only offer you a 4-hour window in a working day. Can be a challenge that is a barrier to stop some people taking them forward, making sure that those who are less sophisticated on using technology get the support they are to get the maximum benefit out of those things. So there still are challenges that remain, but it is a very, very important area of work if we're going to increase the sort of capacity around the demand side response.
The question is particularly around, thank you for that, is demand flexibility. And obviously that locks out people that haven't benefited from the smart meter rollout. And then there might be more than, I can imagine there's 2 groups. One group where they had engaged, but actually the process has been an absolute nightmare, so they just don't bother now.
Yep.
And so they haven't got a smart meter, and the others that just haven't yet been offered it. How many, so I remember quite clearly, I think that our commitment was 20 million homes by 2020. What percentage of domestic homes have got smart meters?
That's
working properly?
61%, so 34.8 million.
Right.
And smart and advanced meters in Great Britain, homes and small businesses, that's 61% of all meters. So it's 61, not 71 that I said earlier. So correct that, yeah.
So where are we now in terms of where do we actually want to get to in order to flexibility, demand flexibility to be fair and actually work?
I think you know that the ideal would be to get smart meter rollout universally to allow demand flexibility to be a fully mass market service. But for that to happen, there's other things that need to be there in place as well. So at the moment, it's still quite a nascent part of the energy mix, except perhaps more on the big industrial and commercial side. But for full domestic rollout, we've got the market-wide half-hourly settlement programme that's being taken forwards by Elexon. We've also got our consultation that was published last week, which is looking at how you create the device interoperability and consumer protection and cyber security that you need to allow this to become a really mass market thing. So there's a number of things happening in parallel. So we're looking more towards the end of the decade that you'd see a kind of broad.
So the whole thing is matured, because I know that when we were talking about it years ago, the big concern was about the privacy of homes and actually the myths around what a smart meter may or may not say about household commons.
And this is where Vicky Ford was spot on around the public information exercise. Yeah. So the 2 winters where we've been able to use this demand flexibility service, the first one, 1.6 million households and businesses took part. Last winter it was 2.5 million, and they were all saving money. Okay. And that's quite a powerful thing that then gets shared across. That then builds trust into the technology. I think often the bigger challenge, as I said, it can be as simple as if an operator's only offering quite a long window for an installation and only on a working day, then there are some people who are not able to accept a smart meter who wants one. So we've got to iron those. Those are what I would call the low-hanging fruit. But ultimately, as confidence builds, as people can see that as a consumer, they are making a tangible saving, then that will drive the uptake.
So very quick, I won't focus too much on smart meter rollout, but obviously you're saying about the communication and the confidence in it will help consumers take it up. But do you need to do more to actually force the industry to deliver the engineers to do the installing of the smart meters?
All of these things are kept under constant review. Right. Targets will increase. The fact that this last winter 3.6 gigawatts were saved on our capacity. Yeah. That is a significant part of what we otherwise would have had to then provide through alternative measures.
It's good to do because obviously it helps to address some of the capacity issues on the grid when we are generating energy.
And crucially, it's delivering savings to consumers.
Yeah, no, that's good. So in terms of are you working on? Are we developing is the department developing an accessible design standard for smart products, particularly around demand flexibility, so that we can avoid a 2-tier energy system?
Yes, that was part of the consultation that went out last week. There was a package. One was about energy smart appliances and looking at minimum standards for interoperability across energy smart appliances. We also had a consultation on tariff data accessibility, which is looking at the scope of a tariff data standard for energy suppliers. So those are exactly the sorts of things that we're looking at and we're consulting on. It's a very technical piece of work, so we're really keen to do it in conjunction with industry and other stakeholders.
But as a consumer myself, I'm very receptive to those points. Very.
Okay. So, very finally, Chair.
Thank you.
Demand flexibility, it does, it's going back, it's kind of a much better way of doing Economy 7. Is it available across the country when you do these pilots? Is it?
I believe it's offered it's for suppliers to offer it to their consumers, and so obviously different suppliers have different approaches. You need to have the smart metering technology in place for consumers to be able to take that up, and I think that's the other part of this move towards a more flexible energy system in future is there is a really important role for suppliers in that, and we're seeing more innovative, different forms of tariff offerings coming forward, being made available to consumers, and the department's asking for evidence at the moment on the arrangements for the default tariffs in future. So going back to your question around what about the consumers who haven't got a smart meter, making sure that there's arrangements in place to protect them as well in this more flexible system in future.
And it's very much a priority for Ofgem to remove the barriers to maximise the people and businesses who can benefit from this.
Yeah, that's good. What I'm hearing is suppliers, while they're regulated, they're ultimately responsible for delivering smart meters, are then also ultimately responsible for delivering flexible demand flexibility. What is your role in terms of really squeezing down and making sure that is genuinely delivering equal access across the country. And on that note, I think your answer has to be brief because I'm being told off.
So suppliers, commercial organisations. Actually, what we're seeing is a lot of suppliers bringing forward different approaches, different tariff offerings, different so consumers getting free electricity at particular times of the week, or free EV charging, and so on. I think we'll see a lot more of that kind of innovation in future.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Appreciate that.
You just mentioned targets there, Minister. Just briefly before I move to Barry Gardner. And there was 61% of homes, you said, now of smart
homes and businesses.
Homes and business. Okay. I'm a bit old in the tooth around these corners. Now, I remember the old DEC committee being assured by ministers that by 2019, 100% of UK homes would have smart meters. Then the target was changed, and that was noted by the National Audit Office. And now the target is 74.5% by 2025. So it's another increase in the next year of 25% of the existing smart meters that have been put out in the last 8 to 10 years. Now, I don't think it really takes Nostradamus to figure out that ain't going to be met, that target, is it?
Sorry, we'll have to take that question away. I think it doesn't sit in.
Okay, we await Nostradamus.
It's not our area, but happy to take that on.
Okay. Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Chair, and Minister, welcome. And can I say, I don't mean to be patronising, but I thought you did very well for your first questions last week.
Thank you.
It was good to see that you'd really read your way into it.
It certainly focuses your mind when you have 24 hours.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I thought that was very commendable. And my apologies for being late to the committee today. I wanted to talk to you about the strategic planning.
Yep.
And you will recall that the government actually announced it would commission the ESO to produce the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan in early 2024.
Yep.
Are we still in early 2024?
We are.
Right.
And
okay.
I'm confident
so
we will still.
When is to be in early 2024?
After we've published this.
Yeah.
Look, we are very, very close. I did a major stakeholder event yesterday, and we had hoped we were ready for them. We're not quite very, ink is drying part of the process, and it's incredibly important because the messages were clear from the stakeholders around certainty, around de-risking, removing duplication and inefficiency, because that will unlock investment and ultimately deliver cheaper bills for businesses and people. And in all my years as a minister, whenever I do stakeholder engagement, you'll have cohorts who agree, cohorts who strongly disagree, and certainly let you know that they strongly disagree. That was probably the greatest consensus I've seen in a room of very diverse asks, that this will be the blueprint towards providing that certainty for their potential future investment.
The plan has to inform the centralised strategic network plan, which will be due in mid-2026.
That's right.
Summer 2026.
Yep.
How are you going to ensure that the NESO achieves those deadlines?
Well, because we understand the absolute importance of this. If we are going to scale up the grid connections, the power generation, the capacity, unlock the investment that we need by 2030 and 2035, these things absolutely have to be in place. As challenging as it is, the fact there is significant consensus in this area makes it a lot more straightforward. There are far more complicated challenges we have to answer where you're not going to please everybody.
I think we all agree with the importance of it.
Yeah.
So you have to endorse the strategic plans and the electricity transmission design principles in the policy statements in order to guide those planning decisions. When do you propose that you will be doing that? Give us a deadline by which you want to have been able to have signed that off.
Have we got a timetable?
I think we'll be setting that out as part of the commission, which will be published very soon. Okay. So that's exactly the sort of thing we're looking at. But we have been working with ESO on the design of the commission so that they understand what timelines we're proposing, etc.
And remember, we have the temporary arrangements I tell you, I've never known so many acronyms in a row. The TCSNP, which has put in the sort of interim holding policies to make sure there wasn't a delay in unlocking investment and work. So that has provided the short-term certainty for investment. But there is such a huge amount of consensus around this. I don't see this being something that's going to slip.
Okay. Look, in oral evidence to us, the Electricity Networks Commissioner cautioned, I think is the right word, about the importance of decision-making quickly about investment. Nick Windsor said, in delaying a decision, maybe legitimately to see what the market will do, they don't fully understand the cost of that delay. It's worth trading a bit of space for innovation and optionality for cracking on, particularly if the thing you're talking about takes a very long time to build. Can you assure Mr. Windsor and us on the committee that you're not making the wrong trade-off?
Oh, I'm personally very grateful for the huge amount of work he's done in reviewing the areas, because he's identified what is working well, and he is definitely the expert in this area, but also those challenges. And that is what shapes us having those temporary interim policies and guidance in place to make sure we're not unnecessarily delaying the huge amounts of investment that we need.
And you will make sure that your decisions factor in the costs of any delays, even if that limits your ability to keep all the options open?
Understood, because we have ambitious targets that must be met, because groups like yourself will definitely hold us to account.
Thank you.
It's 11:55. I pass back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Just a final point. I think from an agricultural point of view, solar panels, I keep a few sheep, and I think they'd be perfect shelter for sheep during the wind, and on sunny days sheep like to shelter from the sun as well, even in the Outer Hebrides. So solar panels can be quite welcome on agricultural land from my point of view. Minister, again, reiterate our thanks to you for coming and not dodging the date. And I'm sure your former geography teacher, Mr. Morris, would be pleased with your general conduct here today. We found it useful. We hopefully brought up some things for you to think about as well. Thank you. Thank you. Order.
Yeah.
Ended. The proceeding has 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 ended.